I remember that day very vividly. I was walking home from school and I decided to take a shortcut, and I went past this really huge, really tall statue that was on top of a hill with a panoramic view of the entire city. And I had been there many times, had passed through there many times, but this time was different. And it hit me out of nowhere. It was a very visceral, very surreal experience, almost like I felt like I was struck by lightning. The image, the vastness, the open space just hit me out of nowhere, and it felt like, you know, when you're sleep deprived and you're kind of dozing off and you get zapped awake from a nightmare, like this, that kind of feeling. It was like getting zapped directly into my brain, and I immediately started getting intrusive thoughts in my head, like looking at this panoramic view and getting absolutely overwhelmed by this image. The intrusive thought was basically, what if the whole world flipped upside down right now and I started falling towards the sky? I've never told anyone what I'm about to share with you. It's the story of how and why I developed agoraphobia and how I overcame it. It happened when I was 18 years old, just a couple months before graduating from high school. And it happened because of the fear of the unknown, the fear of what lay ahead after graduation. And I remember very vividly the day it happened. Now, looking back at the months and years prior to this event, I can clearly see that it was inevitable that this was going to happen. I had all the circumstances and all the symptoms. I had anxiety for pretty much my entire life, and it was inevitable that I would also develop agoraphobia. And the reason why is because I had set the preconditions for this myself. Me and my family, we had decided years in advance. We had been preparing for years and investing into my future. The plan was to send me to study, work, and live abroad, because if I wanted a normal life, if I wanted a normal job and a good education, staying here in my country was not an option. It wasn't even considered. My parents had saved up money, and I had invested in language lessons so that I could get my certificates so that I would be eligible to be taught at the university level in English. I didn't care too much about that. It was so far in the future that I never spent too much time thinking about it until about 2 months before I graduated, when it hit me. It was a very physical sensation that something was wrong with my vestibular apparatus or whatever. It felt like gravity wasn't real. And I know this sounds like a very wacky thing to say or to think, but that was my visceral reaction at the time. A very instinctive, I didn't believe that my feet were going to be glued to the ground. I felt like I was going to detach from the ground and float into space. And then I got another intrusive thought about the statue, like, what if I got teleported on top of that thing with no way of getting down? And that really freaked me out, and I started sprinting down the steps. It was a statue on top of a hill that had hundreds of steps that led to it. So I was sprinting down those steps, and when I went home, I was like, okay, maybe it's, I didn't think much of it. I thought maybe it was from all those all-nighters that I had pulled throughout my teenage years, staying up playing video games, not sleeping well, and going to school sleep deprived. Because that's the kind of feeling I was getting, that sleep deprivation, dozing off and then being zapped back into from a wakeful state from a nightmare. That's what it felt like. But then I thought I chalked it off to just not sleeping well. But then the next day I found myself panicking whenever I saw a vast open space, and I found myself in the weeks that followed, just found myself more anxious and more lightheaded, and I would catch myself hyperventilating, but I didn't know I was doing it at the time. So I was taking deep breaths very quickly, and they were silent, and I started doing this during class, and I didn't realize it. I was like, why are my arms tingling? Why do I have no sensation in my foot? Why does my nose tingle? And it turned out that I had been silently panicking during all my classes and feeling anxious, and the symptoms just kept getting worse and worse. I would start avoiding open spaces like town square, which I would normally cross to go to school, and I would try and find, just like this path right now, I would try and find small streets or alleys or side streets that had lots of cover and trees, so that I could, you know, go in. There would always be something on top of me. This kept progressing till I graduated from high school. So I spent about 2 months with these symptoms, not thinking, but not telling anyone. I was suffering in silence. I was just, remember sitting in classes just waiting for that bell to ring so I could go outside, so I could move, because I felt stuck in a prison cell. And I was, when the bell rang, I was finally like, oh, I can breathe, and all the panic dissipated and I could feel my limbs again. And man, once I graduated, it got worse because I had no reason to leave my house anymore. So I got stuck in my house. I was housebound. And you know, with agoraphobia, when you don't leave the house, it gets worse real fast. Like suddenly you find yourself unable to even go past your street, which is what happened with me. Before, when I had school, I had the reason, the motivation to force myself to go to classes, right? So I'd spend time outside, I would spend time in uncomfortable situations. So it was kind of, I would keep it under control, and it wasn't that bad. But man, once I graduated, once I went home and started playing video games all day, it got worse. I found myself within a week, I was unable to leave the house. I was unable to leave the street that I was in. I was unable to go outside the boundaries of my neighborhood. And I tried multiple times. I forced myself to go outside the boundaries of my neighborhood, and I just found myself running out of breath. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I felt like gravity wasn't real, that I would float out into space, and I found myself sprinting back home in panic. And I just remember this one time, after failing multiple times in one day, just having my head in my hands, sitting on a couch like, man, this is it, it's over. It's over, my life is over. Like, I'm crazy. What am I gonna do now? Mind you, I never told anyone, not even my parents. So they didn't know. I kept it quiet because back then, that was 15 years ago. Back then, in my country, at least in my environment, agoraphobia wasn't a recognized thing. And I knew that if I told anyone, even my family, I would be made to feel like a weak, spoiled coward who should just pull himself up by the bootstraps and go outside. But it wasn't that easy, because the plan was already in motion. The plane tickets were already bought for me to go abroad, and I had, up until that point, delayed applying for bachelor's programs. I was too late. All the places were taken for bachelor programs, so the only options I had were some random elective courses, and I wanted to go to the country, so I had no choice. So I just applied those late. And now, thinking back on this, why I procrastinated for so long, it was fear, obviously, but I think now that it was also an act of self-sabotage. Because remember this, I was holding conflicting beliefs in my head. On the one hand, I had already been emotionally and physically invested. My family was invested in my future abroad. But I didn't actually want to go anywhere. I didn't want to do anything. I don't understand how I thought it would be a good idea for a country boy with crippling social anxiety, not with agoraphobia, with no experience, why would it be a good idea for me to go to the other side of the European continent, to a foreign country? How did I think that I, who was absolutely and fully dependent on my parents, I who had never left my hometown, would not only survive but thrive in a foreign country? So these conflicting thoughts, on the one hand, having pre-invested into my future and holding myself literally hostage to my ambition, and on the other hand, not wanting to really do anything, is what caused so much stress and what unlocked the agoraphobia, which culminated in that event next to the tall monument on top of the hill, like I explained earlier. I've read a bit about agoraphobia, and apparently there's different types. For a lot of people, it means that you are forever housebound. It's that extreme. You can never leave your house. For other people, for most people, I guess, it's more of a avoiding certain places or activities in public because maybe you suffered a panic attack when you were in public, maybe you've embarrassed yourself, or maybe that place gives you anxiety. For me, it's more of a physical thing. I never went through something that made me associate being at a certain place with panic. So I wasn't avoiding places like vast open spaces out of fear that something bad has happened there in the past and I didn't want it to repeat. It was more like I was preventing the bad thing. I was preventing the panic attack from happening before it happened. So apparently you could also have agoraphobia without having associated being at a place with a fear of having a panic attack there or fainting. For me, it was more a physical fear of vast open spaces. And when I read about it, apparently a lot of agoraphobics have this thing where their vestibular system is weak and we rely on our eyes more than on our balance to gauge distances and sizes. Because for me, my agoraphobia is kind of typical but also very specific. So I avoid vast open spaces and places like cinemas, theaters, stadiums, malls. I cannot sit down at a cafe at Town Square, for instance. I cannot sit at a park bench for more than a minute. I have no problem walking in parks and in plain open fields. All these years later, I still struggle at traffic lights at large intersections, especially if there's vast open spaces at that intersection or massive buildings nearby. But for the most part, 95% of my symptoms are gone because I forced myself, because of the investment that I had made, because the plane tickets were bought, because I hyped myself up to believe that my future was predetermined, that I was gonna go abroad and I was gonna study abroad and live abroad. I actually subconsciously forced myself into a situation where I would put myself through a year-long exposure therapy. When I landed in that new country, the very first thing I did when I went to the university was ask for help with accommodation because I was a late arrival, so they couldn't help me with student accommodation. All of that was taken. They said, we're gonna take you to this hotel, and they drive me up to this hotel, and it's kind of like, it's not just any regular hotel, it's a former prison renovated to become a hotel with literal tiny prison cells as the hotel rooms. I just remember sitting in that prison cell literally with this frustration and this feeling of what a ridiculous and uncanny situation I was in. It's as if the universe was mocking me and laughing at me like, oh, you hate vastness, huh? Here's a tiny prison cell for you. Anyway, it didn't end there. The very next day I was contacted by the university and they told me, hey, we found you a more permanent temporary place. And I went there and it was, I kid you not, a literal tourist resort in the middle of a forest in a bungalow next to a massive lake miles away from the nearest bus station. So I had to walk every single day to my lectures. I had to walk miles around this giant lake, panicking, hyperventilating to get to the bus, to get to my lectures. And as you can imagine, I didn't last very long doing that. I only lasted a couple of months. And that second month, I just stopped going to the lectures. I was binge watching South Park. I was binge watching South Park and living off TV dinners. And at one point, I was like, man, screw this. What am I doing with my life? Screw you guys, I'm going home. And I literally went home. I flew back home. I spent the winter holidays at home. And then I reapplied for the spring semester at a larger university, hoping I would get better accommodation. Did that for a couple months, didn't work out. I noped out of there again, like, what am I doing with my life? This isn't a bachelor's program. I'm wasting my time. And I spent the summer homebound, housebound again. And the third time was the charm though. I finally applied for a bachelor program and I was accepted. And what that taught me was that, looking back on it now, I had created subconsciously for myself a way to dip my toes in the and test the waters to prepare me for the real challenge. So by the time I had actually enrolled into this bachelor's program, I had already spent a year slowly breaking through that agoraphobia and doing exposure therapy unwittingly on myself, and man, it worked. And like I said, I still do have some residual symptoms, but at this point over the years they went from something that I thought was impossible to a torturous but tolerable challenge to now just being an occasional nuisance. Sure, I still don't want to go to a stadium, but I don't care about sports. Sure, I may not be able to sit down at a cafe at town square, but I can vlog in nature. As I explained earlier, I was only able to overcome this agoraphobia because I forced myself. I literally believed, due to my emotional investment and due to my parents' financial investment into my future, that I had no other choice. I had to do it. Staying in my country was not even an option. But I still cannot help but think back and imagine what would have happened had I not believed that I had to do it, had I not went abroad to work and study and force myself to go through these challenges. And I know for a fact, if I'm being brutally honest and cynical about my condition, I would have definitely been homebound still, with no experience, with no degree, bound by fear of fear itself. So I guess you could say those 4 years of exile abroad amounted to something. If you are currently struggling with agoraphobia, maybe you have a safer, more peaceful, more understanding and supportive environment. Maybe you don't feel that pressure, the pressure that I imposed on myself, holding myself hostage with my own beliefs, with my ambitionless ambition to go abroad and study and live and work abroad. I want you to ask yourself the question, because I think that you know better than I do what caused yours, and I'm sure that you know how you can overcome it. But the question is, what are the stakes for you? Are there any stakes? Do you want to do you have to? Do you absolutely have to? Or are you going to end up on the street if you don't? Because I feel like unless there is pressure, some kind of pressure for you to move, whether, I'm not telling you to do exposure, because I myself didn't go through intense exposure. Mine was a slow burn. But ask yourself, are you going to make a move? Are you going to conquer this if you feel comfortable? If there's no pressure on you to change, you can pretty much, if you have a comfortable job working from home, or you have inheritance or supportive parents, you can pretty much stay at home forever. You don't have to conquer this. I would like to hear your story, because everyone's different and I don't want to dismiss your experience. Maybe you have been housebound for many years, and if you are, I'm very sorry, and that you're going through this BS. And especially if you, just like me, didn't find understanding and support, and especially if there are toxic people in your environment who discredit and dismiss your condition and your suffering, don't ever let anyone tell you that what you are experiencing isn't real. Because practically speaking, if you're housebound, if it influences and impacts your life to a point where you cannot live, you should not let anyone tell you what's real, because only you know what's real. This is a sign of low intelligence, when someone cannot put themselves in your shoes, or they are so calloused and sociopathic, they have zero empathy and they don't care about you, and neither should you care about them enough to keep them in your life. And what I've done with people like this is I've just stopped talking to them. I just cut them out of my life. This is a channel that is for encouragement and to uplift you. And I hope that you share your story, no matter what it is, whether you still live housebound, whether you are in recovery, or whether you are fully recovered, maybe you're cured. I'm making this video hoping that someone can see it and maybe get some value out of it. If I help one person, that'll be more than enough for me. So please share your story so other people can read it, because you never know who's watching, who's reading. Maybe you get to help someone. If you found this video useful, give it a like so other people can see it too. and subscribe, because I'm going to be uploading a lot more of these anxiety type videos in the future.